Good evening, or good afternoon, or good early evening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the program of the Eötvös Foundation called mustMEET. And we're here for two reasons, because you have to meet the composers of our times that are important, as one of the goals of the foundation, to bring people here so you can actually meet them. And the other goal is you must meet the composer to fully understand, maybe to get a full picture of who the composer is, maybe get some insight by being able to talk to the person live, in person. My name is Gregory Vajda. I'm the program director of the Eötvös Foundation, and our guest tonight is HP Platz. Welcome to Budapest. Welcome to the Budapest Music Center. Your activities are very diverse. You do a lot of things. You are an artistic director of a festival, an ensemble. You conduct. You're a conductor. You're a composer. Yet, to me, now that I've studied your work a little more closely, it seems like all these things are pointing to the same direction, and I hope I'm not mistaken with this. We're going to be playing three different pieces, little short excerpts from different pieces, and I would like to ask you a couple of questions regarding that, or you're welcome to just comment on anything that you think you would like to talk about.
Jó estét. I'm sorry that I'm only the first time here in Hungary, so I don't speak Hungarian. Sorry for doing this in English.
We always apologize for the English. That's still the only language that most of us, hopefully all of us here tonight, speak, because this is going to be happening in English. For most of the time we do it bilingual, but for the purpose of the mustMEET talks, we just use English as an international language. The first thing I would like to talk about regarding a piece of yours called Maro, if I pronounce it right. This is a solo violin piece that was written in 1980. I would like to talk about the piece itself, of course, and your interest in instruments, and not just electroacoustic instruments or machines that make sounds, right? A computer can serve the same purpose as a violin can, but your approach is probably not the same, or maybe it's similar, and you can talk about that. So acoustical instrument techniques and electronic music. You have written a book together with Irvine Arditi. It was out in 2013 with Berenreiter Verlag, and it's called Technik des Violinspiels, Technique of Violin Playing. Tell us a little more about that. How, why, and what comes first? First you do your research, Grundforschung, and then you go into translating that into music, or music comes first and then you look into the details and searching for solutions for your musical ideas?
Music first, I would say. Sound first, because music is more than just sound. It's more than one thing at a time. It's sound and architecture. And to me, in this piece, it's a very old piece. Gregory just mentioned that it was written in 1980. The piece is one possibility to deal with a text. It docks onto a poem by a German author, and a poem that struck me as very beautiful sound-wise, but very interesting structure-wise. And I set this poem to music, and for violin solo. And at the same time, I composed it as a counterpoint for soprano and piano, and soprano, piano, and ensemble, because there's 3 different structures that form the poem. Someone talking about something, then there's something like an aria, that's the part for soprano and piano. The person that the other person is, the third person is talking about. And then an inner monologue by this main person, this main character, the soprano. The inner monologue is getting more important. So it's at the beginning put into a parenthesis in the poem, then it's within 2 parentheses, then 3, and then at the end, I don't recall, it's too long ago, how many parentheses open and close after the last phrase. So the person is withdrawing, which is the content of the poem. And this withdrawal gave me the idea to compose exactly this kind of withdrawal for the violin. So how can I do that? That's where technique comes into the play. I can do it by asking myself, what do I listen to if a violin just plays 1 note? I listen to a pitch and what we could call timbre, color. Now the timbre brings me on to what is timbre at all? Well, it's overtones, dominating overtones, just like the vowels in language, the formants that make a vowel sound like an A, E, U, O, etc. are different ones, and that I can sing even, and that I can do on the violin too. And so I tried to find a way to have the violin play in such a way that with every note there is 1 dominating partial. So I would hear, it's like a multiphonic, I would hear the fundamental and the partial. So I could define exactly the timbre for each note, which led me then to even write a 4-part count, 4-part, we could call it a counterpoint in some way, because if every note is 2 pitches, the fundamental and the overtone, I can of course write a 4-part counterpoint. And this, exactly like in the poem by Thomas Brasch, that's the name of the author, in the end of his text, as the ideas of the person vanish between parentheses, here music vanishes in the parentheses of the overtones, which is extremely difficult to realize. It became easier during the years when many people played the piece. This not the way I thought at the beginning it would be done. Meanwhile, I found out that it's easier to play a harmonic, producing the overtone in question, but releasing the harmonic finger right away. It's a very intricate interaction between the left and the right hand, and if you do it right, it works. It doesn't always work because, of course, there's a lot of adrenaline when you go on stage as a violin player. Even with Erwin Arditi, who 3 years ago made a perfect performance of it. When he did the performance in Buffalo last summer, he was a little bit nervous tension, and so there's less overtones that worked. And the first thing he said when he came off stage was, "Goddamn overtones." So it's difficult.
So you're following the dramatic story of the poem, if you wish, right? This is a poem called Das stille Verschwinden der Angestellten. The meaning of the poem is present in some way, or is just this appearance and disappearance play translated to music? That's one question. The other question, is your violin piece in German? Whether the language that the poem was written influences in any way the diction of the music or the rhythmical elements of the music, or not?
No, not here. No, it is not a one-to-one setting of the German poem into German music. It's more structural docking, so to speak, of the composer to the poet. And
the meaning of the poem, other than the dramatic story that's kind of underlying the whole poem?
Yes, it's there. If you read the poem, you could read the poem along with listening to the music, and you'd realize what's going on. But you cannot do it the other way around. You cannot listen to the music and say, aha, I figure this or that happens. It doesn't work that way.
Well, let's listen to the music a little bit. A couple of minutes from Arditi's performance here. You said this is an old piece of mine. That's what you said. How do you look at your pieces from 20, 30 years ago? What's when you're listening to it, when you're reading your own music?
There's no distance, so to speak. It's like my children, or I have one son, so it's like if I had more children. They belong to me. It's part of my history. I wouldn't write like that anymore, of course, but it's part of me.
Maro is a part of a larger composition, Maro und Stille. And we're going to talk about this a little further later, how one composition fits into a larger, we could call it a cycle, or maybe a larger composition itself. What should we know about this? How does this solo violin piece fit into Maro and Stille?
I mentioned that a little bit before. The entire cycle, if it is a cycle, is 3 pieces. Maro, then Text aus Stille, which means text from Stille. Stille standing for the poem, which is what I called the aria a couple of minutes ago for voice and piano. And then there's the piece for soprano, piano, and ensemble. Then at the end I even added some more voices and a choir, two layers, one choir and 2 alto soloists that use a different text as a counterpoint. Again, it's very polyphonic. You can listen to it on a Virgo record, Virgo CD. One trace of trying to fit it in the violin piece, to fit it in with the other pieces, is the initial very high B, because that's just there to fit together with what the piano plays at that time. And so it comes in very smoothly, because my music is very polyphonic. And there's a lot of cycles, so to speak, that consist of several pieces that are not supposed to be played one after the other, but at the same time. And I try to not, of course, not repeat myself, which means that every time it's different. You could imagine that like in a film, there's cuts, sharp cuts, smooth cuts, there's dissolves, go quicker or take more time. In any respect, it's always different.
Do you handle your own material like an objet trouvé, like a found object, like you take a piece of yours from the 1980s, integrate it into another composition? Is this something that, or you it's kind of like you take it into pieces and reconstruct, or construct something new with the elements of an older piece?
It's difficult to say because this never happened on a conscious level, I have to admit. Debating with myself whether to say this or not. Okay, there's a biographic reason for that. When I was a very little child, I had immense problem with my right eye. You can still see it today because I cannot see much with that eye. And because of that, as a result, I'm a little bit cross-eyed. As a result of that, I see double. That means there's 2 Gregorys for me right now.
I think one is plenty, but...
But there's good points. There's double of the audience too. And which means, again, that from very early in my youth on, way before I thought of becoming a composer or musician at all, it became normal to me that with every image of the world, I would see a counter image, a second one, blurred, of course. And it happened to me that I sat later on in a concert where my cycle Up Down Strange Charm was played in the festival in Strasbourg in France. And I read the program book of some very good musicologist who wrote about my music. And he was most of all right, but not in one point. He assumed that there was a historical, logical line, let's say from San Marco in Venice, the typical San Marco polyphony, the juxtaposed ensembles in the different parts of the church, and then more or less directly a connection to Gruppen for 3 orchestras by Stockhausen. And since I studied with Stockhausen, of course, Platz, writing 4 pieces in different spaces of the hall. And I thought, no, that's not true. Spontaneously, I thought, that's wrong. I never decided on that. It just happened. It was never a conscious decision. So it really happened that since I saw from early youth on to every point of the world, a counterpoint, there we go. That's already that. I don't even have to continue. And so that's why my music is very polyphonic. That's why it happens that there's several pieces that are superimposed, and they're composed as a counterpoint. That means you could maybe compare it with the way Bach would conceive a theme for a fugue. Of course, he had a lot of fantasy. He could have written no matter what. But a theme for a fugue behaves in a different way than a theme for a toccata or something in a more free form, because it would later on have to obey or want to obey to the rules of the fugue. And so when I compose a new cycle of pieces, of course I compose them in such a way that they fit onto each other by obeying harmonic fields that unite them, using the same material but in a different way, or a different material but in the same way, whatever, it's always different.
So you're first and foremost concerned with sounds, as you said.
Yeah.
And that leads you to compose pieces, of course, like composers do, but also do some kind of research to consider all the possibilities. Hence the book about the violin technique, I guess. You had to think through all the possibilities and discover it for yourself with the help of a violinist.
Right. Well, most of the technical parts were written by Erwin, obviously, but I had a much stronger influence on the index. That means what are we going to write about? What must be in the book? For example, tablature writing, which happens every once in a while in contemporary music, as it did in very old music. Initially was not in the content. And so I insisted we needed to write about that. Or violin and electronics, be it live or not live, anything like that.
Just very briefly touching on another subject, Steingräber piano manufacturer, and your interest in creating an instrument, apparently based on your interest in sounds. You're saying in a text that for my piano composition, Brannenwelten 6, I was looking for a way to have the live electronic sounds realized at the IRCAM in Paris not come from speakers in the corners of the hall as usual, but directly from the instrument itself. And this led to the creation of a MIDI grand piano with permanently installed transducers, producing a very different sound from MIDI pianos beforehand. Can you tell us a little bit about this research, if you will, or this instrument?
Well, this, however, was very conscious and clearly designed, because You already said Brandende Welten 6. It's part of a cycle of 6 pieces, Brandende Welten, and the 6 pieces have totally different formations. There's a percussion piece with electronics too, there's string orchestra, etc. String orchestra is the only piece that is normal on stage, of course. And all the other pieces are around the audience. And for me, it was very clear, even before I wrote the first note of the piece, that the electronic sounds would have to come from the piano, because if the piano is here and the loudspeakers traditionally there and there's a different piece in between. It doesn't make sense to me. So the first thing I said when I came into IRCAM and talked to the electronic sound designer who was working with me for that piece, I said, whatever we'll do, I want the sound to come from the piano. So we had to do some research and try to find out how to do that. Finally, after all, things with loudspeakers in different formations, under the piano, in the piano, or whatever, he said, might as well try with transducers. And then we, of course, needed the help of the physical, mathematical department of IRCAM. They calculated for us the wave behavior of the soundboard of the piano, because you cannot just put those transducers no matter where. You have to put them at a good spot. And so we worked like this, and later on it got even better. Steingräber got interested, and in fact Bösendorfer got interested first, but Yamaha had bought Bösendorfer, and Yamaha told Bösendorfer they were not allowed to do that. So Steingräber did it then, and they even added another thing that was not my idea, but makes it even better, and that is a simple stop to detach the mechanics from the strings, the silent button, so to speak, which give me the opportunity, and that's the last piece I wrote for piano, to compose my own scales. Because the pianist plays something, let's say a scale, and the electronic impulses go to the computer. The computer does what I told him to do in real time, gives it back in real time to the transducers, and the transducers make it sound as if the pianist was playing, and that's the beginning of the piece. The pianist plays a chromatic scale, 11 notes chromatically upwards. So obviously that's
so you can have a piano
a major seventh
outside of the realm of the 12 tone.
Yes. But what it sounds like is blum, 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 blum. So it's 11 values within 1 major second. That makes a lot of a difference. It sounds like a piano, of course, but you can do whatever you want. And there's a lot of listening psychology that comes in, because you can do whatever you want, and it'll always to the listener sound like it comes from the piano, even if it doesn't sound like a piano at all, simply because it comes out of the piano.
We're going to jump about almost 30 years. And we're going to jump from one instrument, a solo violin, to orchestra. The next excerpt is from Anders Wand, Elsewhere, The Wall, from 2018. And before we listen to it, just a short quote from you, because I would like you to elaborate on that a little bit. Polyphony, as I understand it, quite politically, as dealing in respect and love with the other in his otherness. dealing in respect and love with the other in his otherness. That's your polyphony, according to you, and you could see it in the recording that there are instruments in the hall. There's a percussion on one of the balconies, a violin.
Solo violin.
And the English horn player was kind of like to the side on stage.
Yes, I think the quotation you gave explains it already. Polyphony for me is like a political model. If you want to write music that is polyphonic, what the different layers need to be different. Otherwise it melts all together. I never really thought that pieces we know from the 1950s and 60s for different orchestras at the same time were really polyphonic in that sense. I always thought, well, it's a very abstract structure here, it's a very abstract structure there, even if it's conducted at a different tempo.
Like Gruppen by Stockhausen?
I didn't want to mention that. But,
you already mentioned Gruppen, so let's just talk about Gruppen.
But I never thought that it's a wonderful piece, but I never thought it was really polyphonic. Much more polyphonic certain pieces by Charles Ives, with a march here and march in another tempo there. That is polyphony. And I wrote pieces where the different layers, or even, let me call it, I wrote cycles where the different pieces are so different that you really can distinguish them. I mean, music works by memory also. And you need to realize, if you want to remember anything afterwards, what you've heard before, you need to recognize it as different the moment you hear it. It doesn't function that half an hour after the piece is finished, you say, oh, that was polyphonical. That you gotta realize it at the moment you hear it. And if you turn that around, to come back to politics, if I only accept people who are like I am, I don't have to continue that sentence.
So the polyphony that is there right at that given moment is what's happening right there. It's the psychology of listening, right? You're remembering the last X number of seconds. You're predicting something, and your prediction either meets with where the composer is leading you or it doesn't, and that's where interference or humor or drama happens in music. And then you're, of course, listening to what's happening in that given moment. But how do you build a form out of that? So what's your way of creating the big form of a piece, if you wish? Is it something that you use a lot of calculation for? Is it something where you make decisions in advance before you fill it with musical material? Or are you improvising? Or is it a mix of those two things, or many things?
It's probably a mix of everything. I do calculate a lot at the base, at the beginning. The musical material I deal with is totally calculated. But the more I calculated that, the more free I feel when I'm writing the score. The piece you just played from the second half, the excerpt from Anderswo Wand, gives an example, would give an example if you listen to the entire piece. It's very robust at the beginning, very aggressive even, and it dissolves more and more and more, not linear, there's little deviations in between, but it dissolves more and more. The model, the thought behind it is a virtual opera scene dealing with murder of a tyrant. And to be very precise, I thought about, the title is Anderswo Wand. Wand meaning a wall. At the beginning there would be the wall of vocal exclamations about the Shoah, like names of victims.
Perished in the Holocaust.
Vanishing in the wall, void of any individuality, because victims in plural.
Yeah.
As the piece goes on, it would dissolve more and more, and some of them would come up to the surface as an individual. It's a virtual opera scene, as I mentioned, and when I did research at the beginning, the opera has not been finished yet and not been performed, except of a couple of scenes that we did. I had entered the Shoah Foundation in the internet and seen films. There's interviews with people who survived that. And I was impressed and struck to my bones by the people who were interviewed there, because there was no hate. There was no thoughts of revenge. Nothing of that kind. They were all filled with humanity and just united in the thought of, we have to help that something like this will never happen again. And so that's a little bit the idea behind the piece. After a very robust, very dense beginning, that it dissolves more and more, and that it leads to a very smooth polyphony. Some of those pieces you can perform on their own, separately, like the flute solo. And then there's a piece for English horn and harp, etc., the violin, and the orchestra still. It's a very relaxed counterpoint at the end, relaxed as opposed to the aggression at the beginning of the piece. Or another second example, there's a piece called Sonnengesang. Consists of 3 vocal pieces and envelope piece, so to speak, for contrabass flute. The 3 vocal pieces are read in the score from bottom to top. A male choir, one voice only, written after the model of Gregorian chant on a text by Meister Eckhart. So a Christian text, so to speak, in Old German. The next one up is a text in Farsi by Jalaluddin Rumi. So it's a Muslim text, which is a counterpoint, a very strong counterpoint to the Christian text in any way you can imagine. And on top of that, there's a tenor solo after the model of the chant in the synagogue, of course, on a Yiddish text, extremely beautiful text. And all those happen at the same time in different parts of the room, together with the contrabass flute solo. And the utopical idea is to not only, each piece can be performed separately, of course. The flute piece is already on a CD. The idea is that each of the vocal pieces would first be done in their congregation, like in a church, in a mosque, and in a synagogue. And that then not only the pieces come together, the congregations come together, and that all the human beings connected with these three religions would come together. And yes, I'm sorry for quoting myself now.
Please do.
Would in respect and love deal with the other one, knowing that he's different. That'd be wonderful. It worked. We did that cycle in churches. We did it in the synagogue. Unluckily, so far it was not possible to do it in the mosque. We'll get there eventually sometime.
So the spatial elements of Wand, the orchestra piece we just heard and seen, is it trying to help the audience recognizing the separate musical materials being a counterpoint to one another? Is it extension of the same musical thought, just spatialized in a way?
It's all that. Music, in the first place, is energy. And in the second place, it's like a sculpture. It's something 3D. And in the third place, it is helping the listener to separate the different layers. But I have to admit, again, I was talking about the problem with my eye before. When I was about 10 years old, I was in hospital for a quarter of a year with that. And after operation that we don't have to talk about now, I was blinded on both eyes. That means I had a thing
bandage over your head.
Bandage over my head. And my arms were tied together so I wouldn't scratch. I was a little boy. And so I was lying there for weeks, and I could only hear. There was anything I could do. So I'm basically a positive person. So afterwards I thought, my God, I learned listening in that time. I really did learn something in a positive way. I learned listening, and I've never listened to music like going to a concert, even just classical, normal repertoire with an orchestra. I wouldn't hear the orchestra as a point of source of sound, but as different characters. I would hear the flute from there, I would hear the horns from there, the double basses from there. It's all very, very three-dimensional to me, and I'm sure that's leaving a trace too.
You have spoken about how different pieces of yours can be played at the same time. It's a very special polyphony. And my next question is, what happened in 1989? Because according to your website, since 1989, your compositions have been parts of a complete work that continues like a diary in associative jumps, distributed in space, polyphonically interpenetrating and arching as a form polyphony, in parentheses. Why 1989? Is there anything that we need to know about, you want to share? And how is this sound diary happening? Because we started with a piece from the early 80s. Now the late 80s, early 90s, you started maybe a new train of thought, maybe something new in your life regarding approaching your own music, or composing something that's beyond the individual pieces that you're producing?
It started actually before. I mentioned that for obvious reasons, my music was polyphonic, even from the first pieces I ever wrote on. Or at least, maybe not polyphonic at the very beginning, but at least more dimensional. Later on, I realized that my third piano piece began just like the second piece ended, and the fourth one like the third piece ended, and that was a rather conscious thought of maybe doing that. It happened finally in 1989, that's true. Not for political reasons. I assume you thought of German unification or whatever. It simply happened because I was living in a place. I was invited to live there for 9 months, very close to the German border, I admit. And the place I lived in was not very well isolated acoustically. It was difficult for me to work because I heard everything everybody else did. So it was in a small village, Schreian, which later turned into the title of the piece. It's northeast corner of the old Federal Republic of Germany, walking distance from the German border. And one day I sat there, I wanted to compose, and I had to tell myself, I'm sitting here, from the left I hear this, from the right I hear that, the person living on top of me does something else, and now there, and I started fantasizing at this point, there's a little pond, why not a band of the fire brigade playing out there, and some cow mooing in the farm behind me. So more or less automatically then I wrote a piece that dealt with this kind of surround sound. And since each of the sound sources, even the band, the wind orchestra, a marching wind orchestra is part of it, they start close and then march away, so the sound vanishes outside. It needed to function on their own, and there was no use, because it was different tempi, to notate in a score for everybody together. So I declared it different books. The first book was for cello solo, written for Siegfried Palm, and the second book was for cello solo, superimposed by the third book for flute and cello, the flute starting alone, so it was overlapping. And then the fourth book was with 2 pianos, because from the neighborhood I listened to a piano playing. There was a pianist invited. I was a composer, a poet lived on top of me, and over there was a pianist and a composer. And the 2 pianos, and then fifth book was solo trumpet, and book number 6 was the band, the marching band outside. And so there was 6 books that you could collect in a folder, and that was the material for that piece. And that has never left me ever since.
With your piece Wand, we have already arrived to stage, as in music for the stage. And you said there is a virtual or a not yet realized opera scene behind that piece. We are going to continue with a piece that was written just a year later than Wand, in 2019 and 20. And this is, as you call it, a small theater piece. And it's called Ryoko no.
Ryoko is the singer.
Is the singer?
An extraordinary singer. She's Japanese, and she's... Oh.
She has, yes.
So I don't have to explain about that. She's a no singer. That means not a no singer, but a no theater singer. The no theater voice is very particular. It's usually a male voice. And she's trying to bring that into contemporary music. Just saying that for the people who don't know her. And she asked me to write a piece for string quartet and her. And I decided to not only write that for a no singer, but to really try to write a little piece of no theater myself. So I wrote it for string quartet and voice, or to be more precise, it's several pieces again, sorry, at the same time. It's a piece for 2 violins called 2 Violins. Or there's a little joke behind that, because the piece was written to take part in a competition that I had my doubts about. Because it sounded like it was kind of a fishy thing between pop music and serious music. Sorry. And it turned out to be exactly that, the case. But because from beginning on I had my doubts, I called the piece 2VL, which means, of course, 2 violins. But if you pronounce it word by word, letter by letter in German, it means Zweifel, which means doubt. And so I had this piece for 2 violins, and I wrote on top of it Orioko's voice, accompanied by viola and cello, simulating as a virtual no orchestra. That means the percussion and the choir, the male choir that sings with it.
You're here to teach for our year-long masterclass, really, a workshop that is connected to the Goethe year. It's Goethe year in 2024, and we will be working on with young composers on a text from Clavigo, which is a play by Goethe. Of course, it's cut down to 4 short scenes. But when you get to a theater work or an instrumental theater work or a music theater work, text is always something that comes first. That's really is my question. We have the Japanese poems, which are 1,000 years old. And you found them, you were searching for them. When you decide that you write a contemporary no piece, you start searching, and until you find a text, you are not writing anything, or?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so text comes first, for the most part.
In the chronology of work, yes.
And just tell us a little bit about the poems, and whether they have a story, or is it important in this case, in this piece, that it has a dramaturgy, that it has a direction?
I selected the poems accordingly, I would say. You see them here. They form almost a sequence leading through the day and leading through the year. That's an idea that has accompanied me for many years, identifying times of the day with times of the seasons of the year and elements. Like my orchestral project Schwelle started with night, winter, air. And in Recital, a long piece for flute with tape at the time, also uses that. There's a text at the end, a Japanese text. I wrote that in Kyoto. And the Japanese text is dealing with a winter night, the cold air, and the stars that you see. And Schwelle ends, after going through the entire year, with spring, water, and morning. So in the end, it's like a little bit like Vivaldi, the seasons.
Let us listen to Oh, there is some music here, so I just let you look at it for a second. So let me ask you this before we listen. In the music theater section of your list of works, I only found 3 works: a chamber opera, Dunkles Haus, and 2 pieces that you call szenische Komposition, Verkommenes Ufer and Lilith. From the early 80s, late 80s, and Lilith is from the early 2000s. Where are you with opera, and what do you think of the genre, and how do you approach it, and why is one called a Kammeroper and the other one is called a Szenische Komposition?
Kammeroper, chamber opera is a chamber opera, and Lilith was part of the same project that Anders Wand belongs to. So since it was performed as a separate scene, I wouldn't want to call it a chamber opera scene. Doesn't make sense.
Is your approach different though? Like a chamber opera would be sung through...
No. Do
you have a definition in mind, or
no? It's better to decide on that later. But chamber opera, first of all, declares the size of the apparatus. Verkommenes Ufer is a project that I wrote parts of, and when I asked my then publisher to get me a commission for it, because I was sure I wanted to do that. It was on a text by Heiner Müller. They found a commission, but not with choir and not for large orchestra, but chamber opera. That was Dunkles Haus then, the Bavarian State Opera in Munich. And there's a CD of that. And for Verkommenes Ufer, I waited with and tried to find a commission. And then I gave all the sketches and everything to the historical archives of the city of Cologne. And that building collapsed, killing 2 people, and my sketches. But I've still got it here. Some sketches were found, and I don't know whether it was all found so far. They're still dealing with things and repairing things, restoring things. If I'm lucky, I'll still write that.
was pushing you a little bit on the opera topic because opera nowadays means so many things that it doesn't mean anything anymore. And opera also means, also depends on where and who is doing it. And you said it's sometimes maybe better to decide what a piece is after you've written it. How do you look at the big opera houses, the repertoire? How do you relate to what's now opera business? And are you concerned at all whether your pieces connect to this part of the business, whether they're practical for an opera house, whether they fit in between Madame Butterfly and Tosca, or not, or it's a different genre really? It is a different audience that you're targeting. Maybe you believe that a piece will find its audience or find the right place to be performed in front of the right audience.
In principle, I think every composer, also the young composers that we'll be working with this week, should try to write his own music. His own. In any way. It does not make sense to adapt even before you write the piece to what you think is needed. Of course, it's always walking on a thin line. It doesn't make sense to write in such a way that nobody can do it. You have to remember that writing music is encoding an idea that someone else has to decode and realize it. So the best thing is to work together in a team. It's necessary to be able to be a team player, and then you can do fantastic things in an opera house.
You're talking about the ritualistic entrance and exit of the singer in this piece that we just heard a little excerpt from.
That didn't really work because it needs a larger hall. Also, sound-wise, it didn't work there because it was a very small hall in Tokyo. It happened during the pandemic, and there was a very little audience, and every person in the audience was separated by plexiglass from everybody else. So it was a very strange atmosphere. Normally, it would be a larger stage, and the second violin, which was on the right, should be behind the audience. And so viola and cello, would be where the second violin was on stage. And so the sound sources would be much further apart than they were here. So they were all too close to the microphone, and it was a little bit too dense to me.
So because this is a mono opera, if you wish, it's one singer, right? There is a story to the, or a progress to the poems. There is a road that you're leading us down. So that's the dramaturgy of what's happening. What's happening in your operas when there is more than one singer? So how do you compose? How do you relate to stage? Let's say Puccini writes people coming in on the left, and it's in the music, and then they go out on the right, and that's also in the music, and then this much time you need to find a candle and light it for Mimi in La Bohème. So it's realistic. Of course, it's surrealistic also because it's music. Musical time is different from real time, but it has a realism to it. Where is your time? How is your time working when you're working with, let's just maybe say, clavigo? These 4 scenes from the Goethe text that we're going to work with. What's your approach to that? Are you, in your mind, the first stage director, of what's happening
yes,
in the music?
Absolutely. In my scores, I write very clearly what happens where on stage. And I don't calculate, but I've got always a stopwatch here on my wrist, and I try things out. Just like every note that I write, I have sung before at home. So I'm not writing anything that I haven't sung. Maybe you can even realize that when you hear my music. And even knowing that in a no theater play, the singer does not come on stage with the musicians, but has a ritual entrance, makes me, of course, check it, walking through my apartment with a stopwatch, trying out how much time do I have to give, how much time do I have to allow, and how little time may I give, because I didn't want to write a 2-hour piece for string quartet and voice. Would be interesting, but was not the intention in this case. And so I check all that, and it's necessary. In the first performance, in the world premiere, when you write something and the stage director has some crazy idea that he wants to go through, you have to be strong and insist. Happened to me in the Bavarian State Opera with Dunkles Haus, because in the love scene, the stage director had the idea that the male character should take the female singer in his arms and carry her into a huge bowl that was on stage, and they would have an act there together and discreetly vanish in there, so he wouldn't get into trouble later. And he wanted me to write some more music because maybe the male singer wasn't strong enough, or the female singer too heavy, or whatever. In any case, there was more time needed, so the male character could catch his breath again. And I said, now come on, you got to be stage director because you wanted to do my piece. Do it. Do my piece. It's composed, and I'm not going to change this. And he wanted to insist, and I said, okay. I know the schedule of the airplanes going back to Cologne. I'm going to take the next plane and leave. I won. So sometimes in life you have to be insistent.
Which is a big deal in Germany if you get to win against a stage director, right? In opera world. Depends on where. Depends on how much you insist. It's great to have you here for this conversation, and also this week and later on with the process of the Clavigo project. Thank you very much for joining us for mustMEET.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.